Exactly. So hi everyone, I'm Blue Martin, the chair of IASI. Thank you very much for tuning in to the third in IASI's new webinar series and the second featuring our special guest, Henry Schniewind. So to backtrack briefly, I decided to run these two sessions on avalanche safety for two reasons. Firstly, as I mentioned in the first webinar that we ran before Christmas, training in this area comes quite late in the instructor pathway. The first formal module, which is the level one off-piste security, is part of level three, which I, in fact, very in a timely way did last week. But that's long after most instructors start actually skiing or riding off-piste. Secondly, I have a particular interest as I've been personally involved in three avalanches, in two and set off one. And this is particularly relevant at the moment in the Alps, as there's been a spate of deaths and serious injuries from avalanches since the significant snowfall just over a week ago. And I think this webinar will go a long way to explaining why there's been this sudden rise in avalanche accidents in the past week. I'd like to introduce our guest speaker. So, Henry Schniewind is an internationally recognised snow and avalanche expert. He first trained in avalanche forecasting during his geology studies at Montana State and Boston universities. He's been based in the French Alps for over 30 seasons, where he works as an off-piste ski guide and directs Henry's Avalanche Talk, an avalanche education program he founded to address the fact that most avalanche victims trigger the slide themselves. Henry's delivered more than 900 avalanche safety talks and courses, spoken at international snow science conferences, and published widely in the press. He's a professional member of the American Avalanche Association, and Henry's Avalanche Talks is endorsed by ANENA, the French Avalanche Association, which credits Henry with helping to save well over 100 lives through his long-running avalanche awareness and accident prevention work. As a reflection of the value that this talk will have, IASI have decided to recognise it as a one-year CPD for our members. So if you want your attendance tonight to count as CPD, please could you put your full name in the chat now and just add CPD so we've got a record of people who want to do that. Then please watch the whole talk as we'll conduct a short test at the end to validate your attendance, make sure you've been paying attention. And then we'll invoice you the €11 CPD admin fee by email afterwards. Okay, over to Henry. Thank you.
Great. Thanks for that, Blue. And it's a pleasure and an honor to be here with everybody this evening. And we'll get started right away here because there's quite a bit of information to cover. The talk is going to be the structure of the talk is as follows. We're going to do a quick little intro and short recap of the first webinar we did in early December with the theme, Where Do I Start? And then we'll look into how and why avalanches are not triggered. That's the core theme of this talk. And that will include the key ingredients. And we're going to focus especially on the key ingredient of a weak layer, weak layers overview and layers of faceted grains. Then we'll look at some practical observations, some practical, what I sometimes refer to as perplexing observations. And we'll explain these observations through a four-step triggering model. And great, we're back with Blue here. And then I'm going to conclude with a discussion about, a brief discussion about what's actually happening out in the mountain right now. And as Blue referred to, is that there's a lot of explanation in this talk as to how and why, not only how and why avalanches are triggered and not triggered, but also explanations as to why there's so many accidents. And a lot of that is around the uncertainty around snow stability evaluation. And that's why we're going to end with the beginning in mind and cover and emphasize the basics that we covered in early December, because the technical sides of things is fascinating, and I hope I share my passion, and it's contagious enough to get you all passionate about the subject, the scientific side of things. And it is very beneficial in terms of safety, but only if it's applied with the basics and the basic key points of accident reduction that we learn on avalanche courses and in the framework that I'm going to outline in a minute here. So
Thanks,
here,
Henry. Where did you get to, by the way? When did I cut off?
I'm just at the structure, at the beginning of the structure. I called you actually, and so I delayed a little bit. So apologies, everyone, for the delay. And we're great. It's great to have Blue back with us here because, as I said, she's not only a host, but she's also a co-presenter with me. So I'm counting on her.
Yep, I'm here.
I
I'm
would
back.
have felt lost without her. So the the theme of the talk in December was ride hard, ride safe. Well, that was the title, and the theme was where do I start? And the idea is just having lots and lots of fun and keeping things reasonably, acceptably safe is a big part of having the most fun possible out on the mountain. So what we looked at was a summary of the problem, knowing where secured areas end and unsecured areas begin. 9 times out of 10 or even more, it's the victim that triggers the avalanche. And 9 times out of 10, it's a slab avalanche that's involved. And that's really what we're going to be looking at this evening as the focus. And then sadly, 15 minutes to live if you're buried. And those are the concrete sides of the problem. And then there's the less concrete, more abstract side of the human factors that I've outlined with black bullet points because I think they're the most deadly. Nothing happens most of the time, so we tend to get complacent and listen to people who think they know what they're talking about or sort of go on our own intuitions, even if they're wrong. And then an accident happens, and people are saying, well, they should have known better because in retrospect, it always looks very simple and explainable. But sadly, the consequences are such that in many times, most times when there's an accident, there's serious injury or death. So then we looked at the solution, which was applying a framework, the human factors I just mentioned, and working as a team to remind each other to apply the key points. I say the basic points. It's not really basic. It's the key points that really keep us from safe. And so what we covered in the more specific points was the uh, the slope angles and terrain traps. These are areas where we can start our off-piste safety journey. Slope angles, avoiding steep slopes over terrain traps was a big part of it. Steep slopes, like right here above terrain traps, holes. There was sadly someone, a British person on La Plagne killed. It looked like on a steep slope over a terrain trap, a deep hole buried very deep. Even if the fracture or the avalanche isn't very big, the terrain traps are defined as something that even makes a small avalanche really dangerous or deadly. And the green white check and the white check in the green circle there is showing people who are completely safe right next to a really dangerous area. So I came up with some ideas too of some ideas to of places to that you can go and then places to avoid that sometimes are very right near each other and right near the piste as well. So that was a big part of what we covered in early December, avoiding terrain traps, cliffs like right there going into a hole. And then we looked at the essential rescue equipment, the transceiver and probe and shovel, and training with them. So in summary, these are the things that keep us safe out there: the slope angles, looking at the danger levels and the bulletins, knowing the definitions of the danger levels and reading the bulletins, looking at recent avalanche activity, and on the in the terrain in the field, looking out for terrain traps, avoiding steep slopes above terrain traps, keeping distances in the group between group members when you're going on slopes, and stopping at safe and safer zones so you keep yourselves less exposed when you are in avalanche terrain. And then, of course, having the essential rescue equipment training and always looking after these human factors that come up and bite us and influence us and impede us from using our better judgment, our experience, and knowledge. And also remembering that we don't need to be perfect. We don't need to be perfect to have an acceptably save time out there as long as we're applying those points as best as we can. We don't need to be perfect to save lives either, when it comes to a partner rescue. And those key points are summarized in a free video that's on YouTube. It's a 12-minute video on Henry's avalanche talk on YouTube. And I provide some scores that you can, in view of rating what you're looking at, is if it's dangerous or not. And I also have on the pocket guide. So that's a free pocket guide on video, and then this is the pocket guide, the physical one, that's normally £12.50, and you can get a discount with the coupon code IASI Club on my website in the shop there. And I'm also going to show this little slide at the end of the talk. So those are the key points that need to be applied all the time and are essential for making further knowledge that much more beneficial. And this is definitely what we're going to look at tonight can be really beneficial, getting to know how and why avalanches are not triggered, getting to know the beast. The better get to know the beast, the better you can get at avoiding getting caught up in the claws of the beast. So what we're going to start with here is, in view of answering and better understanding how and why avalanches are triggered or not triggered, we're going to look at some key ingredients and practical observations. And all of this around cold, dry, accidental slab avalanches, which make up about 95% of accidents, according to recent studies. So the key ingredients of an avalanche is a cohesive layer of snow, generally cold, dry snow most of the time, with a weak layer underneath and a steep slope of 30 degrees or more, 30-degree steepness or more. And then also you need a trigger. And for those of you who are not familiar with the 30 degrees threshold, 30 degrees is about the steepness of a steep part of a black run. So what you need is a cohesive layer of snow, and that's what slid here, and it left like a crown line before. We call that fracture a crown line, and it slid on a weaker layer underneath, and it was triggered by the victim, who's actually probably taking with them a couple other unsuspecting victims. More and more, as the activity of off-piste and ski touring becomes more popular, these avalanches being triggered from above others is more and more prevalent, and I would advise not doing that. It's not a good way of making friends. So slope angles, 30 degrees, as I mentioned. It doesn't look that steep, but it's basically the steepest part of a red run to a steep part of a black run, depending on the resort you're in and how they rate their slopes. But avalanches release on steep slopes. And you need a trigger as well. So to summarize the key ingredients, a cohesive layer of snow on top of a weak layer underneath, steep slope of 30 degrees more, and a trigger. But the funny thing is that even when all of these ingredients are in place, you can get some big surprises. And one of the surprises is that most of the time nothing happens, but you can get avalanches happening much bigger than expected and in places you wouldn't expect. So that's why what we're going to look at is some practical observations. These practical observations that I often refer to as perplexing too, because they're hard to kind of get your head around. Like, why are they happening? Why doesn't a slope that's unstable like release with the first person or the second or the third? And so does it go on sometimes the fifth or the sixth or the seventh or the 100th person? Why do avalanches release from above sometimes? Even from a flat area, you can trigger an avalanche that releases way, way above you on a steep slope. That's called remote triggering. And avalanches do not release most of the time. For me, is the most perplexing practical observation, and I think the most dangerous, because we become complacent as a result of this not happening, even when it's supposed to be dangerous. So to give you a demonstration of each one of these practical observations, avalanches releasing after a number of skiers. This is the seventh person actually triggers this avalanche as they come across, and this slope is quite a bit steeper than it looks. It is definitely 30 to 35 degrees at the top. And remote triggering looks a bit like this. I thank the SLF, the Swiss Avalanche Institute in Davos, for a great little, a really good video there. And the third thing that's a practical observation that's perplexing is avalanches do not release most of the time, and nothing happens. So we end up getting a bit complacent, and that leads to bad habits. So a quick
Henry,
summary of what, yes.
do you think that's been a contribution to some of the avalanche deaths that we've seen over the past week or so?
Well, yeah, I think especially the last one, the avalanches don't release all that regularly, so people get led into complacency, or they're vulnerable to the types of things we talked about just beforehand, where some less experienced people get drawn in by some locals who've done 5 seasons, they know where to go, and then all of a sudden there's a big avalanche. And luckily, the one you told me about was there wasn't any deaths or serious injuries. Maybe the biggest bruising was to the egos of the people who got in a lot of trouble from their bosses and from the local authorities, from what I understand. And that's a really good
Yeah.
lesson. So, in order to answer the question why these things happen, we need to look under the snow. We're going to look under the snow, which brings us into the next little subsection here of key ingredients. We're going to look very closely here. Weak layers, a weak layers overview on, especially looking at what's called facets, because that's what's out in just in the Alps. It's the most prevalent type of weak layer, or that's developed with these types of snow grains. So there's lots of different types of snow that form different layers in the snowpack, and some of these layers are stronger than others, and sometimes you can have weak layers deep down in the snowpack. And by the way, the snowpack is the total amount of snow from the ground all the way up to the snow surface. That's what we mean when we talk about the snowpack. And like I said, we're going to focus on facets, which is a sugary kind of a snow that doesn't have any cohesion or very little cohesion. And it's called facets because facets are actually the flat sides of gemstones, and you can see it looks a little bit like a bunch of diamonds thrown together when you look at it under a microscope, like right here. And like I said, here I'm taking out a bunch of faceted grains of snow out of this snowpack, which is pretty much all made up of this really weak type of snow. And that is this video was taken a number of years ago, but this is the type of situation that we've had in most of the Alps, at least the northern French Alps, where I am, into Verbier and onwards, Verbier where blue is. And this is under a microscope what an actual one of these snow grains actually looks like. And you can see the flat sides to it, which are the facets. It's also referred to as depth hoar, as in hoarfrost. And these things can get really big. They can, relatively, they can get up to like a couple square centimeters in size. And so here's a little demonstration again from me digging the snow out like that, and where it's actually made up the entire snowpack. Sometimes it just makes up layers, but what we're going to do this evening is really look at it as an entire layer, because that's the way it has been through the December, where we had lots of dry, clear, cold nights and days and nights, and that's how it generally forms. I was able to get the sound working on this again, so we're going to just play this a couple times. We call this loud powder because you can hear the sort of hissing sound as the person comes by during and after his yelping. Were you able to hear that, Blue? But give me a thumbs up if you could hear it. No? Okay, maybe not. Um, but this is to
Mm,
demonstrate
I think
that.
if sorry, I think if everyone turns their volume up just while the video's playing, you might be able to hear it.
Okay, I'll do it one more time here. Um, let's see. Um, some reason, Blue, I'm not. Did you just do a share of your screen there? Because I'm not able
No?
to. Um, let's see, share my screen. Um, can you see? Because okay, I'm just
That's
gonna
very
try
strange.
to. I'm gonna try to
Start
share
again.
my.
Yeah. It's not our day technologically today, I think.
Here we go. That's and I'm going to try it one more time. If everyone has their volume up, and one of the main points practically I wanted to come across with here is not only the loud powder, really, it's to demonstrate that this as a layer of snow is not dangerous in and of itself. It when it becomes dangerous is when there's snow on top of it, other layers on top of it, like right here. And at the moment, you can do this. You can press your pull through the snow and get a sense of this hollow feeling of when you push through to the this weak layer. And this is what it looks like in a hasty little snow pit. There's a there's a stronger cohesive layer on top of a weaker layer below. For example, just doing a hardness test, a basic hardness test, I couldn't even push even four fingers into this layer here. It's about 75 centimeters total. So a couple feet and a little bit more than a couple feet, and then underneath there's about a foot of just all this sugary snow. I could put my whole arm into it and pull out that snow. It's like sugar, and so that's a very weak kind of a setup. And to demonstrate and just show kind of what this can look like and what the current situation is out on the mountain right now. Here on the left, you could see a compression test, column test that was conducted by and photo by Xavier de la Rue. And you can see the very faceted layer, sugary layer of snow underneath that will collapse right away on that tapping of the shovel on the top. And here again, thanks to SLF, there's
For
a
an extended column
video
test,
that
ECT,
shows how
isolate a
this is
30
done.
centimeter by 90 centimeter column of any desired height. Place your shovel blade on one end of the isolated column and apply a series of compressive forces to the blade to stress the column. First apply 10 taps from the wrist, then 10 taps from the elbow, and finally 10 taps from the shoulder. In this video, the fracture occurs after the second tap from the elbow, and for an extent.
So you can see the practical tests that are done to just see how reactive and unstable this kind of layer can become. And that it moves us to the just a discussion on how this type of faceted layer of faceted grains, how it forms. And very briefly, what happens is that the ground is always at about 0 degrees. So it's just about 0 degrees centigrade, give or two 1 or 2 degrees. But as you go up the snowpack up to the surface, it can be much colder, sometimes up to -10, -20, even -30. And so what happens is that you have a warmer air mass underneath, or a warmer air mass down next to the ground. And like any warm air mass compared to the colder air, it will rise. And one of the characteristics of a warm air mass or a warm-ish air mass is it also holds on to a lot more water vapor. But as it rises, it cools and it can't hold on to that water vapor anymore. And so what it does is it transfers that water vapor directly onto the snow grains above it, and directly into its solid form, skipping the liquid form. So that's, some people call it sublimation, some people call it deposition. But whatever the exact technical term is, as the as the air rises due to this temperature gradient, so the gradient, because it's 0 degrees down next to the ground, -10 or -20 up at the surface, you have this process happening. It's called temperature gradient metamorphosis, and this occurs when there's a temperature gradient in the snowpack. So if you look at this diagram, the snow surface here is demonstrated at -20. And you have a temperature gradient of 20 degrees over a meter. Because if you look up in the upper right-hand corner, you can see that it's 100 centimeters, so a meter. And what you need for this process of temperature gradient metamorphosis to take place, you need about 10 degrees per meter or more for that process to start happening. For that faceting is another word, the commonly used term for temperature gradient metamorphosis. So the snow transforming into that sugary type of snow. And because we had about a month of very, very clear skies, which is the key thing, and we had this process happening for almost all the month of December into January, and that's why the snow turned into this really sugary type of snow, or the snowpack turned into this very sugary type of snow that we have on the underlayer at the moment. And this, as I said, clear skies are the most important thing to drive this process. And also on shaded sides of the mountain, it tends to stay, the snow surface stays the coldest. And so the process will continue to happen during the day at this time of the year, in January through December, January and February. It's really, really pronounced on north sides of the mountain. That's why in the avalanche forecast, you'll see that the most unstable sides of the snowpack and the most unstable avalanche prone are on the northish sides of the mountain. It's also, in my opinion, one of the main reasons why you have most accidents happen in December, January, and February, and on northish sides of the mountain. You'll see that the forecast will be saying on the south sides where there's some melting and freezing going on, it's actually making it much more stable. So in sum, if you have a temperature gradient of 10 degrees or more over a meter, then you have this process happening. It starts happening with 20 degrees. It really gets going big time. And if you think about it, maybe there was about 50 centimeters of snow in a lot of places, or even less, during the month of December. And then you had snow surface temperatures at -20, sometimes closer to -30 even if the air temperature is at about 0 to -5, -6 or 7. The snow surface temperature on a clear night can get down to -20 or -30 because of an effect called radiational cooling. And when you have a thin snowpack and this happening, this process happens within several days or a week. An entire snowpack can turn into this sugary type of snow, or at least big layers can develop. And that's what we saw at the beginning of the season. So here, just to summarize, give you an idea of what this process looks like visually. The air, relatively warm air mass rising up, it cools off, can't hold on to the moisture anymore, and deposits through deposition the water vapor into ice, and the existing grains actually grow and into these faceted grains, and it makes the snow very, very sugary and an unstable layer.
So, Henry, can I just ask a question? Can
Yes.
it change back again?
Yeah.
Did you hear? Can the sugary snow, can it transform back again into a more stable layer?
it can become stable. It won't generally it's there for the whole winter. What can change it is lots of rain, but rain and melting that percolates really deep into the snowpack and freezes, and hopefully refreezes and bonds the snow together. So rain followed by freezing is the most effective, and then there's purging. So during big snowstorms, with the slopes that avalanche will carry a big part of the layer with it. Not all of it, but that can help get rid of a lot of the grains. And also something that can help also is skier compaction. And not just like, one or two people. It's got to be thousands and thousands and thousands of people. So on the regularly traveled off-piste itineraries or routes and throughout the Alps, those places will become a lot more stable than areas outside of it. And if anybody in the audience has any experts out there has any other ways, then when we have our comments and questions, please bring that up, because it's a question that comes up all the time, and it's quite practical and good to know.
Yeah, and can I just add in to say, if you haven't got the chat open, have it open and feel free to drop questions in as they arise, and we'll answer them at the end.
Yeah, thanks. So at this point, now we've talked about there's lots of different types of snow that form different layers in the snowpack. Sometimes you can have weak layers deep down in the snowpack. In the Alps, and right now it's the vast majority of accidents occur and with a faceted layer being one of the primary reason for triggering. I'm not going to say it's the reason for accidents, because we trigger the accidents as well. We trigger the avalanches, as you'll see, but the role of faceted layers is the vast majority involved with the vast majority of accidents in the Alps. There's other types of weak layers that that contribute to accidents more in other parts of the world, like surface war, that we're not going to get into tonight because it's not pertinent to the Alps, and we have a limited amount of time. But those are areas that we can chat about during the questions and answers or in another session. So if you picture that really weak layer all by, and for simplicity's sake, we're going to say it's this weak layer that's the entire snowpack, and then you have snow come down on top of it, like came down in the last storm throughout most of the Alps. Then you have a cohesive layer of snow on top of a weak layer. And in this little animation, you could see snow being transported and loaded in the leeward side of a slope. We call that wind loading. And in the process, it creates what we often refer to as a wind slab. And it's not just wind slabs that go, but this is a good demonstration of that. And they tend to be one of the more sensitive areas for triggering. And so if we look at the key ingredients, the cohesive layer of snow that's on top of a weak layer underneath on a steep slope and a trigger, then things are primed for the following scenario. So this brings together those practical observations, especially since he triggered it on a very low part of, or seems to have triggered it anyway, on the very low part of the slope. So so now, in order to explore how and why avalanches are triggered or not triggered, we're going to look at is these practical observations that we've gone over a few times, and the key ingredients, of course, and explain these observations through a four-step triggering model. And so these avalanches releasing after a number of skiers, avalanches release above remote triggering, avalanches do not release most of the time. Why is this? We're going to explore that further by investigating under the snow in another kind of a way through this model of four-step model of triggering that was developed by a physicist, a professor of physics, François Louchet and Alain Duclos. And you have four steps that have to happen in order for an avalanche to trigger. And this model demonstrates that. You have a collapse initiation, a collapse propagation, a crown crack initiation, and then crown crack propagation. And so what we're going to do is also imagine slab avalanches in that oval fashion. That oval, it wasn't by mistake in the model. It's more or less the kind of shape of most slab avalanches. And if you, like in this one right here. And also just for the sake of, if there's really very experienced people who are in the scientific world of snow sciences, I use the word collapse propagation because it's simpler and it's easier for everybody to understand. I use that instead of using the weak layer shear or super shear propagation that comes up and has come up a lot more in the last decade or so when describing the propagation of the weak layer. But I use that word, and I also use the word rupturing and disintegration of the weak layer, and I think it's more appropriate for an audience that's more practically oriented. But if there is anybody out there that's from that has a snow science background, especially in this area, during our comments and questions period, it would be interesting to hear if there is something that's useful for everybody, if we apply the words shearing or super shearing. So that's a technical aside for now. But if we look at the side, the model from the side, and we look at the key ingredients from the side here, and the cold dry cohesive layer is the blue blocks held together with a spring. The weak layer is the upside down V's, like think of it as a house of cards. And we have a steep slope of 30 degrees or more and a trigger. So we look at that and imagine this skier as they're going across. They may damage that weak layer and get it to start to collapse. And that's exactly what's happening right here. And to give you an idea, you can see this person is actually skiing on the slab, but it's releasing below him. And if you can imagine that oval shape that I asked you to picture on the mountain when we're talking about a slab release, this person is in the middle of the slab that is actually taking off. With him, it is a man, so it's him who's being taken away on it. And as we look here as we go along, you can see these blocks that are breaking up. Remember, the cohesive layer is blocks, and then the blocks sort of transform into kind of a liquid state. Of course, it's not melted liquid, but it's behaving like a liquid once it goes. The person's getting taken for a ride, and that's what's really dangerous about slab avalanches. That guy actually lived through that and had a good lesson. But that would have been a scary experience indeed. I mean, it's a good demonstration of someone triggering an avalanche. It doesn't look like it's that dangerous. It looks like great snow, and that's what really attracts us to these slopes impulsively a lot of times, even over our best judgment. So if we look at we're going to look at this model step by step. So starting with step one, is a collapse initiation. And the word collapse, it's definitely a collapse in number one. And there may not, and most of the time, nothing else happens other than just a collapse of the weak layer. But if you move into number two, you start getting propagation. And the word I use, propagation, you can also think of it as spreading out. And that may be an easier way of picturing what's actually happening. So the house of cards, if you think of the weak layer as a house of cards, it's collapsing and it's spreading out like dominoes collapsing or falling over. And if that continues, then we get a propagation. Those are the first really key steps to an avalanche being triggered and releasing.
And
Now,
Henry,
yep,
is that when, if you're hopefully not on a steep slope at this point, that you might be hearing whoomphing sounds,
yes,
shooting cracks and stuff?
yes, and that is a perfect segue into the following video. Because if you're on a flat, this person, I love this video because it shows, and what I was about to mention is that once that number one is created and there's propagation, the person is taken completely out of it. That's why I took the person out of the model from here on out until the very end. Because once that propagation, once the initial crack gets big enough, it can start propagating on its own, and it takes on a life of its own, and the person is completely, or the victim is completely out of the picture. And as you've said very correctly, Blue, that is when you can hear these whoomps and you can see these shooting cracks. It's that weak layer collapsing, and it will actually drop and leave these cracks behind. And so another way of demonstrating this that snow scientists do and avalanche forecasters when they're trying to get an idea of how reactive the potential is for propagation, which is essential for this step and also the third step to get to number four, which we'll see in a minute. This is called a propagation saw test. So what they're trying to do is recreate a crack that a person would make by damaging it from the top, but they're doing it from the side here to test it. You can see that there was propagation, and that number two was very very effective in this case. So another practical thing in terms of understanding how avalanches are triggered is that once that number two happens, and I use the word a ruptured weak layer here because there's absolutely nothing, no cohesion left on the bed surface here. And so there's no cohesion, there's no strength left once that number two happens. So once that weak layer is ruptured and there's no strength left, the slab of snow is literally hanging on the side of the mountain, on the side of the slope, just hanging on with the strength of the crown above. So the strength from above pulling, that we call that traction strength. So there's traction stress pulling down. There's a shear stress on the side, the right and left flank, and there's also some stress at the bottom and or strength. So at this point, the only thing that's holding it on is the strength, but especially on the crown bit on the top there, that's where the most stress and or strength is. And so if you add the slope angle, and once you start adding a slope angle, of course, the forces are pushing the snow down the hill rather than onto the flat surface. And the steeper you get up to about 38 degrees, the more stress there is going down the mountain, the more chance there is that the stress that's been now left the slope, the slab hanging on the slope, only being held on there by the top and the sides and a little bit on the bottom. This can be the result. So I'm just taking a step back for a moment before we get back to the strength on the top and the sides and the bottom, which is also what we call the rim. This is a very good example of phases 1 and 2, where we don't have the strength on either side. We have a steep enough slope, and the importance of the crack at the bottom. If you notice at the bottom, there is the propagation saw test is being applied to see just how much of a crack you need to actually get a propagation going. And you can begin to sort of think of that as skiers on top, the impact of skiers. Sometimes it might take, 1, 2, or 3, or 4, or 5, or 20, or 30, or 100 to get the damage on that weak layer enough so it propagates. But getting back to the slab that's now hanging on the side of the mountain, and looking at steps 3 and 4, there's no strength on the bed surface anymore. And if there's enough load, which is the technical word for weight, if there's enough of the weight of the slab so that there's more stress than the strength at the top, the crown, the sides, the flank, at the bottom, the starch wall, which we also refer the total amount of that, the rim of the slab. If there's more stress than strength on the sides and on the top and the bottom, then you can get a number 3, and the slab will start to pull away. It'll just create a little crack to start with. It'll create a little crack to start with, and this is where propagation is so important again. If the crack does not get big enough to then propagate, to spread out, then it'll just stay like this. And but if the weight is enough of the slab, if the slab weight is enough, and that opening gets big enough, then that will propagate, that crack will take on a life of its own, and then you'll actually have an avalanche. The slab will release. And this is the way it's demonstrated in the model. But now we're going to look at some practical observations and videos of what this actually looks like. And so here I've added this poor person back in because even though they haven't had anything to do with this since the initial trigger or the initial crack at the beginning, collapse, the initial collapse number 1. They're still on the slab, nevertheless, and they're most likely quite helpless. And so to demonstrate this 3 to 4, this is a video that was just taken last week, right near from where I lived, where people were jumping off of this jump here. And let's see if I can. They were jumping off of here, went up, and there was someone who came down here and probably created a couple ones, but that was it. The collapse initiation was there. It's still there. Then another person came along and bounced down, landed here, fell here, and fell here again. So there's probably about at least 3 or 4 crack initiations, number 1s that are created there. And either that's what led to the propagation, or maybe just right here, it was just a really weak spot. There's a debate about exactly how the propagation will move to a critical point. That's what the fracture mechanic engineers call it, when the crack goes critical. It looks something like this here when we get to 2 and 3. Let's see, I need to... Oh, here we go. So there is the action of the 3 going to a 4, and you don't even see the number 1 and 2 happening yet. And I'm going to show you the full video in a minute. But here we're still in the final phases of the 4-step model. The 3 going to the 4 no strength left on the bed surface, and so that slab is that was hanging is now pulling away from the top. And it's the same thing in this video right here. When the seventh person came along and triggered, that opens up from a 3 to a 4. And this is also an opportunity to talk about something that's going on the mountain right now, and a lot of the accidents that I've been aware of in the last in the last 10 days or so, where very sadly, I know in France there's been at least 6 people killed, and I think throughout the Alps close to 20 or so. Is a habit that we get into, and I know I have with working with avalanches in my capacity in my training in snow science and in ski patrol, and now as an off-piste guide. You can get into the habit of being able to ski out of avalanches because they're smaller, and a lot of the majority of avalanches actually are, when you do trigger them, are subcritical sizes, and you can get out of them. But the problem is with these persistent weak layers and big weak layers as we have right now is that they can go into the supercritical triggering where you have no escape. And to demonstrate this, just a couple photos here. This guy triggers an avalanche and he'll be able to ski out of it if it doesn't get any bigger. And this one didn't get any bigger. This avalanche right here, where it was triggered up at the top, the person took a ride, but then was able to just ski out. There's a lot of instances where we get used to being able to manage the avalanche. However, when experienced people get taken, a lot of times it's because they didn't anticipate the size of a supercritical avalanche happening when you have it moving into that level of triggering where the propagation goes much further than anticipated. And this is an example here of what I'm talking about. A guy comes down the slope. There's already been a track above, like in the video we saw just before. He takes a big fall, and a big fall, by the way, is about like 6 people jumping down up and down on the slope and creating a massive, massive number one. And so, of course, if you have a big number one or several number ones around, the chances of propagation are a lot higher. And if there is a weak spot around, then it's also a lot more likely to propagate if you take a fall. But at this point, it's brought to its very, very edge, right to the threshold of propagating. And all it takes is just this one more turn. And here we have this kind of, and again, try to imagine the oval of the model. I mean, this is a very crude oval, but it's still a subcritical trigger. And this guy, theoretically, you could imagine he's a pretty good skier. He could ski out of that, but it goes from subcritical to a supercritical avalanche very, very quickly as the propagation spreads out. And when you see the video panning out again, you can see the whole thing went huge. And there's absolutely no way out. Plus, there's another wave of the avalanche that's going to come down and bury him. This guy was taken out alive as well. So we'll just quickly look at this one more time and try to imagine the different phases going on. There's either several number ones, crack initiations, and also just within the weak layer itself, there are always flaws that so there might be just several weak points that ended up being triggered by this guy. And it's the same thing in this video. We look at the same thing, or the same video as we saw before, same sort of idea, massive jump and a fall. So much more likely to create number ones that are going to collapse and get to a critical point where there's propagation and all the steps of 1, 2, 3, and 4 occur. So what we're attempting to do here with these practical observations in the four-step model is give a satisfying response to the question, like, why is it that avalanches release after a number of skiers? Why is it that avalanches release from above for remote triggering, and why is it that avalanches do not release most of the time? And to further emphasize and go into this and demonstrate it, we're going to just look at a couple more videos and images to emphasize how these practical observations are explained in the model, or at least there is a fairly satisfactory explanation as to why not the first person or the second or the third or the fourth, this one is the fifth or the sixth that actually triggers this, why this is happening.
Whoa, go!
And I'm just going to come back quickly here and ask you to turn your volumes up, and I'm going to turn my volume up, and you can hear the whoomphing if you listen closely. And Blue, you can help me by determining whether you can hear that or not. Right here.
Whoa, go!
So you hear the whoomp, and also hear the hissing, which is comes back in here. That hissing is all those facets that
Okay, time to
go as it's being purged out. So when you heard that hissing, I mentioned before when you were asking me, Blue, about how you can get rid of that weak layer or stabilizing it. A lot of this avalanche is pulling it down, pulling that weak layer down. And also you can see the remote triggering going on here too. And the huge, massive propagation of from the weak layer propagating out and also the crown line propagating out. Now, these people were taken, several of them, like over close to a kilometer in distance, and no one was killed. Very luckily, a couple people got very bad knee injuries, though. Which brings us into the next section, which is the avalanches released from above or remote triggering. And as you saw there, it's not just from above. You can get remote triggering avalanches below, to the side. But what is a lot of times the most problematic is when you're on a very low slope angle and you trigger something from above. So that's why I'm always looking above me for if I've triggered something on a slope above me, whether I'm traversing or skiing a slope, or any case where there are steep slopes above. And of course, that model also, for me anyway, satisfies to a large extent the questioning of why it is that avalanches do not release most of the time. Nothing happens most of the time, so we get into bad habits, we get complacent, and that's because each of these steps has to happen. And a lot of times there's not enough of the propagation to go to the next step, or for whatever reasons, not every single step comes together. So we looked at this four-step model within the context of trying to explain why avalanches release after a number of skiers, avalanches releasing by remote triggering. À distance, as the French say, that's perhaps a little bit more intuitive. A word for that or a phrase for that, and avalanches don't release most of the time. This model helps to explain that, and also hopefully by investigating these practical observations through this four-step model, it's helped to provide you with a better understanding of how and why avalanches are triggered or not triggered. And the François Louchet, who's the physicist, who is the partner in coming up with this model, he wrote a book, Snow Avalanches: Beliefs, Facts, and Science, and in English and published by the Oxford University Press. And there's a chapter on the four-step model of triggering in that, and it's quite interesting. So if anyone's really keen and as nerdy as I am about it, then I suggest you buy it right now. Which brings us now to the conclusion that that as much as these models are satisfying in our inquiries, there's always with snow stability and snow stability evaluation, there's always an enormous amount of uncertainty. So that's why I want to bring the session to an end by returning to the beginning, and which was the theme of the talk that we gave in early December. Where do I start? And it was aimed at people just getting into off-piste and touring. Where do I start with avalanche safety to keep things acceptably safe? And this at the same time as just some general advice about the uncertainty that's out there right now, and just why it's so important to be applying the key points of accident reduction that we learn in avalanche courses and that I point out in my framework. And so expect and continue for, I think, the rest of the season, the potential for bigger than expected avalanches, longer lasting instability. They call that latent instability, using this scientific word, and then surprising avalanches happening in surprising places. And like in the last few weeks, I know a number of people have been killed and really injured in areas where there's trees. And there's a myth that you never get avalanches in trees. Thing is that trees do add more stability to a slope, but especially when there's sparse trees and there's a weak layer, and there's mega weak layers in forests that are north-facing slopes right now, there's a real danger of getting hit against trees. Trees are also a terrain trap. And if you think of the damage that it does to a car that's going 30 miles an hour or so, imagine, or whatever, 50 kilometers an hour, imagine what it would do to you if you're going 50 or 60 miles an hour, and whatever that is, 80 or 90 kilometers an hour, and you can hit a tree. That's how fast you'd be going if you triggered an avalanche in the trees. So to summarize the key points that were not applied by victims of avalanches, and what we looked at, where do I start? These slope angles are really important to emphasize. Terrain is much more certain than snow stability evaluation. And so what I'm doing right now is I'm paying a lot of attention to slope angles, staying away from 30-degree slopes as much as possible, and using things like this the map layovers that show slope steepness. And like right here, you get the different colors, and the route I chose was snaking in where there's the least amount of 30-degree slopes above me, around me, or beside me. And in the lower right-hand corner, I've come up with in bold the types of maps, map apps that are replacing FatMap, that have a number of really experienced mountaineers and guides and experts are finding these type of functions, slope angle functions, and other functions to be really effective with. And then even just these two key points, avoiding slope angles above terrain traps. Most years, about half of all avalanche accidents involve people skiing on steep slopes above terrain traps. So if you can avoid that, you're really, that kind of scenario, if you can avoid that, you're really reducing your chances of an accident enormously. And then just going through all these points again, as I pointed out at the beginning. Remember, we're ending with the beginning here in mind. These different points are all points that were not applied by people who were in accidents by victims of avalanches. And so if you apply them, there's a really good chance that you can keep things acceptably safe. It's in a free video. They're covered those points. A free video, my pocket guide, on video on my YouTube channel. And again, you can get the pocket guide here with those key points and a scoring system that really helps with discussion about evaluating whether or not an area you're looking at going into is acceptably safe or not. And that you can get on my website, henrysavalanchetalk.com. And so we'll just review what we looked at and turn it over to questions and answers. So we looked at the introduction, a short recap of what we did at the beginning of December in our first webinar. And then we looked at really investigating how and why avalanches are not triggered. That's the theme of the talk tonight. And so we looked at key ingredients, the weak layers of facets, which is out there in big time right now throughout most of the Alps, and with a cohesive layer on top of it. And we looked at practical observations that helped to explain them through the 4-step triggering model in a somewhat satisfactory way. And then we concluded with the idea that snow stability there's always going to be an enormous amount of uncertainty around it. So just remember to apply the key points that keep us safe out in the mountain, and that way all this extra learning and increased knowledge can be very, very useful in avoiding accidents. Getting to know the beast and the beast's behavior is a really good way of avoiding getting caught up in the claws of the beast. So I hope, thank you very much for your attention, and I hope that made sense. And the things that didn't make sense or things you want to make comments about, that's what we're here for an indefinite amount of time now. Huh, Blue?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So yeah, any questions, please just write them in the chat. That'd be great. We've got one from Pier Francesco already, which is, can you repeat the difference between subcritical and supercritical in terms of avalanche size?
Yep, I'm gonna just come back and share that. What I want to do is just come back to that. It's basically the difference between subcritical and supercritical are subcritical is the size of an avalanche that you can ski out of. And I know when I was doing avalanche control, kicking off avalanches and things, we got into the habit of where we could ski out of a lot of avalanches, and every once in a while you get a surprise when it goes into a much bigger size. You can't ski out of it, and then you're at the mercy of the beast. And so does that answer your question, that the biggest difference for us, the practical terms, is that a subcritical triggering is one you can ski out of, and a supercritical is where it gets much, much bigger and you can't ski out of it, like this person here.
Yeah, that's just horrifying, that video.
And this guy here.
Yeah. Okay, so Julian's got a question. On one of the videos where they're jumping off the rock, above them was a ridge of a cornice. Are cornices an indication of slope safety?
Well, this is the one that you're referring to, Julian, up in here, and I'll take this for those of you who aren't really sure. Cornices are like this lip right along here. It's hanging over the side of the mountain where the wind was being blown into, or where there was wind loading going on. And when we were preparing for this talk, Blue wanted to point out too that this looks like really good skiing too, so you'd be attracted to coming here. And so that's an indication that there's wind loading going on, and that there's more snow there. And what I like to do is work backwards from recent avalanche activity. So while there's recent avalanche activity on similar slopes, there was one just on the next slope over to the left. And then if you work back from recent avalanche activity, often it can correspond to the wind. The problem with the cornices, though, is that sometimes during a storm, the wind changes direction, and you have a cornice hanging over the opposite side, or and apparently I don't live in Scotland and spend a lot of time in Scotland, but from what I understand, Scotland, like you can have a snowstorm and the wind changes all the time there. So you can have a cornice from the storm, and then the wind changes and blows the snow to the other side of the mountain, and it may not leave a cornice. So to answer your question, it is an indication of where there's wind loading going on, but you've got to take it as with other points, and not just on its own.
Yeah, but I think it's probably not an indication of stability. It's an indication of there's been wind, and wind is not, like in the simplest of terms, is not the greatest sign of this is going to be a totally safe slope to ski, right?
Well, I was assuming that what he meant by stability was he was saying is it an indication of instability? Because
Ah, right.
generally, cornices face the direction of where the wind loading is going on, like that, like the video that I showed with the wind blowing the snow right here, and what that little, and it shows a little cornice here too forming from the windward to the leeward. And generally, we talk about a cornice, like right in this area, right as those arrows are going over, and there's a little bit of shade underneath it. That indicates where where there's wind loading going on, where there's more snow being blown to. So there's instability. It's an indication of instability. So I'm sorry, that was what I was assuming that what the question was actually is a sign of instability.
Cool. Before we do any more questions, if there are, those people who would like to make this webinar count as CPD, I'm just going to we're going to ask you a question. I'm just going to turn the messaging to just host and panelists this time. I think, Henry, we thought a good question for those of you who want this to count for CPD to answer would be, what are the ingredients for a slab avalanche to happen? Could you all pop the answer to that in the chat as a sort of recognition that you've been attending this webinar? So just do that now. And so for the 3 people who said that they would like this to count for CPD, stick that in now, I think. Is that right? Hold on. Yeah, that's right. I hope I haven't turned off the ability to message host and panelists. If I have, there we go. Let's try that. Okay, brilliant.
Top layer of snow, weak layer. Yep,
Yeah,
there's a few people have come in.
Okay, cool. Great. Okay, so all of you people that have answered, if you might not have seen the initial thing in the chat. I'm assuming that if you're answering this question, you would like this to count for CPD. So we'll get in touch with you after this by email. So if your name is not on your kind of Zoom name, could you just put your full name at some point in the chat so that I can see who it is and we can contact you afterwards? Sorry, I meant to say that all in my introduction, but I think it probably got cut off before I was able to.
I think Adam Brown was asking if his little answer went through. I'm not sure if I saw.
Yeah, it did. Yeah.
And then there's also, while we're doing this, Blue, I'm just going to answer a question. Human triggering is 93% responsible for people setting off avalanches. Is that correct? Somewhere around that, somewhere between 90 and 95%. And recent data I've seen is closer to 95% actually. that are triggered by the victims, and about a similar figure for the cold, dry slab avalanches. So even though like wet snow avalanches are there's more of them in the springtime, for example, they make more noise. They I believe it's because it's more predictable, and the idea of wet snow avalanches are more predictable, and the idea that you stay away from steep slopes after rapid warming, especially if it gets above or close to or above freezing, and especially after snowstorms, staying away from steep slopes, that seems to be a rule that people that rule is something that people tend to abide by. And I've also noticed that natural avalanches, um, the ones that are not triggered by people, a lot of times they get the accidents occur on closed roads or closed runs.
Cool. Any other questions from anybody? No, I don't think so. Cool. Well, in that case, let's wrap it up. Thank you so much, Henry, for doing our your second webinar for us. It was absolutely fascinating. Even though I actually attended the IASI Level 1 Mountain Safety last week, I still learned something from this, so that's absolutely fantastic. Oh, there's another question before we finish from Neil. After storms above 30 degrees. Oh, sorry, that's your answer, isn't it? So yeah, basically, thank you so much. And I'm sorry to everybody about the technical hitch where basically my internet decided to just completely cut. So uh, thanks for holding it together, Henry, and just getting on with it. And very much looking
It's a
forward to
pleasure. I
seeing
really
you.
enjoyed, very much enjoyed giving the presentation, and thank you all for your attention. Have fun and be safe. And if there's any more questions, let us know. You can always go onto my website, henrysavalanchetalk.com. There's an email, contact email, and you can send questions to me there and pester me. I love to be pestered about this subject that I've been passionate about for decades. And I'll finish off by telling you just I hope you all go out and have a great time and be safe, because you can have so much fun out in the mountains and skiing and deep snow and off-piste and ski touring. You can have so much fun and keep it acceptably safe if you follow the basic methods that we've gone over in this presentation tonight.
Great. Thanks so much, Henry. Let's call it a day and just say if anyone wants to watch this again, we're going to put it on the YouTube channel, IASI's YouTube channel, so you can rewatch it or share it with friends. But on that note, thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks very much. Have a good evening.
Thanks. Bye.
Have a great season.